Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 25th of February, 2026, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me by video link today are Charles Malet and Vanessa Beeley. Now, later in the programme, Charles is going to be reporting on the war between the US Department of War and Anthropic over AI-enabled weapons. Vanessa is going to be bringing us up to date with the regime change efforts in Iran, and I'm going to be covering the latest digital ID news, but we're going to begin today with Ukraine because TASS is reporting that the Foreign Intelligence Service in Russia is saying that London and Paris are considering equipping Ukraine with nuclear weapons. They are reporting an assessment by Russia's agency SVR that Paris and London are actively working to provide Kiev with a nuclear bomb. I'm presuming these are tactical nukes, but we can talk to Charles about that in a second. It is believed that Ukraine should be supplied with a Wunderwaffe, is the quote. At present, according to the information available to the Russian SVR, London and Paris are actively working over the issue of providing Kiev with a weapon of this kind, as well as with a means of delivery. This involves a covert transfer of relevant European-made components, equipment and technologies to Ukraine. As an option, the French small-size TN-75 warhead from the M51 submarine-launched ballistic missile is being considered. And they also said that Berlin has prudently refused to take part in this dangerous venture. They're saying that the British and French plot is a gross violation of international law, first of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and carries the risk of destroying global non-proliferation systems, so on. So anyway, this is what the Russian intelligence agencies are saying. So if we just put that back on screen, I'll just show you what Maria Zakharova is saying. Basically, any steps taken to assist Kiev in acquiring military nuclear capabilities will be interpreted by us as an attempt to pose a direct and critical threat to our nation's security. Now, the issue here, Charles, is that Zakharova is absolutely mentioning non-proliferation and talking about there being an effort, a discussion within Russia on non-proliferation in April, and it does seem to me a bit unlikely that Britain and France are really considering doing this. If they are, it is an insane thing to do. But nonetheless, in the meantime, this kind of rhetoric and pushing this kind of information out for Russian intelligence to find is going to put pressure on Russia to consider, further moving away from their position on non-proliferation.
It would. I mean, I think it does a whole host of things. And as you say, whether or not it is true, but of course, having just listened to Donald Trump talking about Iran and Iran not acquiring any nuclear capability at all costs, and then this is tossed in as though it might be perfectly normal. But also the other thing is it's a massive distraction from what the United Kingdom and France might already be up to in Ukraine without actually declaring it. So the idea that this would be a step beyond is the case, but actually it does sort of obscure the rather nefarious goings on that have been happening, frankly, since 2022.
Yes, and I mean she's also talking about the the anti-Russian rhetoric that's continuing to come out of the United Kingdom and the EU, and this just never ends, Charles. So what are the Russians supposed to think?
Well, I think they're put in a very difficult position, but I mean, they have been in a difficult position since the late 80s, early 90s on exactly this subject. But of course, I think the difference now is the way in which the messaging is joined up, some of which I'll be commenting on and sort of exemplifying a little bit later. But it's, it is absolutely the sort of kicking of the hornet's nest, forcing Russia into a position to which they have to respond in the same way that they said they were doing back in February 2022.
Indeed. Well, in the meantime, then, amongst all the statements from the UK and the EU to mark the anniversary of the Ukraine war, the start of the Ukraine war, the UK has announced what they're describing as a new landmark sanctions package, cutting off critical oil revenues, they say, and further degrading the Kremlin's ability to wage its illegal war, their words. So they're saying nearly 300 new sanctions, and including oil exports, key suppliers of military equipment, and so on. They're claiming that Russian oil revenues are now at their lowest since 2020. as the sanctions bite. And this news comes as in Kiev, Yvette Cooper is there announcing a new support for Ukrainian resilience, as they describe it. So they're talking about military, humanitarian, reconstruction support, including £20 million of new funding for emergency energy support, $5.7 million to provide humanitarian assistance to frontline communities, medical mentoring is how they describe it, and also helicopter training. So not quite F-16s, but nonetheless. And then Starmer is going to lead a coalition of the willing call today, as Foreign Secretary, as Cooper is in Kiev. And then the UK is security in Ukraine. They're basically saying that they were going to continue to support Ukraine. It's going to make Britain and Europe safer, stronger, and more secure as a result. Well, we can buy that if we like, but let's just bring Yvette on, saying today I'm shining a light on Russia's disgraceful attempts to erase Ukrainian identity in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. Vanessa, let me just get a comment from you on that, because it seems to me that what Russia was intending to do with the special military operation was in fact to reinforce the Russian identity in the Donbass, not erase Ukrainian identity anywhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. They were always very clear about that. And really, basically, what worries me about this this nuclear rhetoric. So it's fine for a Zionist genocidal regime to have nuclear weapons, and it's fine for a Nazi regime in Ukraine to have weapons, which speaks very loudly as to the ideology of members of our own governmental class, whichever side of the divide they're on.
Absolutely. Well, look, let's move on then to Iran. And of course, the military buildup continues. There's some rhetoric doing the rounds, Vanessa, that perhaps Trump is having second thoughts about actual military action. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think so. I think what they're doing at the moment is trying to buy time through the negotiation track. Iran may also be trying to buy time to to fully set up its air defense systems, and also to reinforce its borders, which is related to what I'm going to talk about now. But I just wanted to show two sections from Trump's congressional speech yesterday. First of all, here he talks about the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani back in 2020.
And we took out Soleimani. I did that during my first term. Had a huge impact. He was the father of the roadside bomb. And just over the last couple of months with the protests, they've killed at least, it looks like, 32,000 protests. 32,000 protests.
I mean, first of all, I just want to remind everyone that it was not only General Qasem Soleimani who was killed by Trump's assassination. There he takes credit for it, as he has recently taken credit for putting Jolani and the al-Qaeda forces in power in Syria, but it was also General Mohandes, who was leading the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, who was killed with Soleimani, both of whom were genuinely fighting ISIS on the ground in Syria and Iraq. And Qasem Soleimani was responsible for the training of the National Defense Forces for the Syrian Christians in Syria to be able to defend themselves against ISIS and the Takfiri forces. So that's just a reminder of who Trump actually killed in that assassination. And then he goes on, he also, of course, is using the exaggerated numbers on those killed in the recent Mossad, CIA, MI6 engineered riots in Iran. And then he goes on to talk about the latest threat from Iran.
But this is some terrible people. They've already developed missiles that can threaten Europe and our bases overseas, and they're working to build missiles that will soon reach the United States of America. After Midnight Hammer, they were warned to make no future attempts to rebuild their weapons program, and in particular, nuclear weapons, yet they continue.
So we really are in weapons of mass destruction territory now with Iran, and it's very clear to me that there is going to be no backing off from this, whether that's Israeli Netanyahu pressure on Trump, or Trump simply has as part of his agenda to fully destabilize Iran. And as I'm going to point out, I don't think it's any longer going to be simply a kinetic war. I think we're now entering the territory of really a full-blown hybrid war. Let's just have a look at this map, which shows very clearly the Kurdish areas, so the areas in Turkey, in Syria, in Iraq, on the border with Iran, and even inside Iran. Now, what is interesting, that entire conglomeration of Kurdish population is between 30 to 40 million, according to conservative estimates. Of course, the separatist factions within those populations are very much backed by Washington and Israel against Iran. So that gives an indication of how big this threat is. And recently on UK Column, I published an article which talks also about British intelligence has been radicalizing children in the Syrian ISIS prisons for the long war against Iran, because Trump basically gave the green light to Jordani to retake the northeast, pushing the Kurds out into the far northeast corner and releasing ISIS fighters up to 15 to 20,000 from the prisons, which then become a threat in Iraq and also potentially on the border with Iran. Then we have, this is effectively the release of an Israeli documentary talking about the training of Kurdish separatist proxies in Iran, so within Iran itself and on the borders of Iran, specializing in protest training and resistance training. That's the Israeli terminology, to Iranian security forces. And then very recently, in the last few days, Iranian Kurdish factions have formed an alliance which is apparently has as its mission to topple the Tehran government. So it's an alliance of 5 members of various political groups within the Iranian Kurdish areas known as the political forces, or the alliance, of political forces of Iranian Kurdistan. At the moment, we have videos circulating on social media that I've been able to, if we can just put that up on screen, that I've been able to confirm that IRGC and Iranian military are heading to the border between Iran and Iraq, obviously building up defense against the potential of an attack from Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan, and even from within Iran itself. So clearly, for me, this is part of a hybrid war. There is no chance that the US and Israel are going to be able to cross borders into Iran. They would be eliminated. But what they appear to be doing is grouping their proxy forces together. And then in addition to that, apparently, according to Ehsan Safanejad, who's an Iranian analyst that I've been speaking to quite often in the last few weeks, he's saying that the Iranian forces are now erecting a security wall on that border. So they seem to be well aware of the threat. And then let's have a look at something that Ehsan said on X the other day, I think about 3 days ago, which I totally agree with. So what he's saying is, what if the US attack on Iran coincides with peaceful protesters, in inverted commas, taking it to the street to show their support for regime change in Iran? After all, the mainstream told you that armed insurgents in western parts of Iran were mere peaceful protesters. Why wouldn't they do it again? And of course, we now know they are being trained by Israel. So that seems to be the job now, quietly distributed among a network of armed groups on Iran's periphery, the PJAK, PAK, the so-called National Kurdistan Army, the MEK terrorist group, the Baloch Liberation Army in the south, and the merger of terror groups in southeast Iran with Jaish al-Adl. Each has its own baggage, its own ideology, its own patrons, but together they form something bigger, a patchwork of proxy forces that can bleed the Islamic Republic when it's dealing with a US bombing campaign without a single foreign soldier crossing the border. So exactly as I said. And then if we move to Netanyahu and his recent address at the start of a government meeting in the Knesset, he talks basically about alliances in the region. And he says, in the vision I see before me, we will create an entire system, essentially a hexagon of alliances around or within the Middle East. He goes on to say in the same speech, an axis of nations to challenge the radical axes, as he calls them, both the radical Shia axis, which of course is predominantly the resistance axis itself, and the emerging radical Sunni axis, to which, of course, he's referring ISIS and al-Qaeda in Syria, although, of course, they were instruments of Zionist power in the region, as well as working on behalf of the US and the British. And then, in addition to this, US forces have rather unexpectedly fully withdrawn from inside Syria. If we have a quick look at the map, you'll see that in the northeast, they've fully withdrawn and taken their forces into the Kurdistan, Iraqi Kurdistan region under the Kurdistan regional government there, which again reinforces my idea or my speculation that they are planning a multiple-pronged proxy attack against Iran with US support within the Kurdistan region in Iraq. And then from the Al-Tanif base on the border with Iraq and Jordan, they've effectively withdrawn to Jordan. What does this do? This leaves a vacuum inside Syria, which has potential also, if we look at the next map, for, as I mentioned, there in the section on the Jordan-Iraqi border, for ISIS to move where the Al-Tanif base was, where they were recruiting, arming, and training all manner of terrorist factions, but including ISIS, to be able to traverse Iraq and reach the Iranian border. You then have the same in the northeast, that ISIS might potentially cross Iraq if it can. Of course, there is resistance forces in Iraq towards the Iranian border. You have the threat there from Kurdistan factions, both inside Iran and on the border with Iran in Iraq. From the top there in Azerbaijan, Britain, the US and Israel have been building up their influence, their surveillance capability and military presence in Azerbaijan, which is on the northern border of Iran. Going around again to Turkmenistan, many of the terrorists that are actually in Syria came from Turkmenistan. So again, I consider that to be a threat. And you also have another Kurdish area there. Also from Pakistan, you have terrorists from the Balochistan area that may join with the Baloch freedom fighters, as they're called, in the south of Iran. And also, I would say we can't discount India. Prime Minister Modi is in Israel today. They've agreed on an $8.6 billion defense agreement, and Israel is providing India with air defense technology, and India is the first to receive it. It's never actually been given either to the US or to the UK or to any other country in the Zionist bloc, but it's being given to India. So basically, this is how I perceive the war is going to proceed against Iran.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. I'm sure we'll talk more and extra on that. Charles, let's come over to you then. And of course, if we've got war fronts in Ukraine, in the Middle East, in Iran, also increasingly the rhetoric about the Arctic continues to build.
It does indeed. And it's all part of one bigger picture. And of course, as you pointed out, and indeed Brian spoke about on Monday, we have just passed what's being described as the 4th anniversary of the Russian intervention into Ukraine. So as you can imagine, the messaging machine went absolutely crazy, and the chief of the defense staff was no exception, retweeting this from the Ministry of Defense, saying that Putin thought he could wipe Ukraine off the map in a matter of days, and basically confirming the Ministry of Defense does still stand with Ukraine. We will listen to what the Chief of the Defence Staff said yesterday as he read off a script.
As Chief of the Defence Staff, I know that Ukraine's defence is Britain's security. I've seen firsthand the bravery, ingenuity and courage of Ukrainians, civilians and military alike. Ukraine and its people continue to stand strong with the support of their allies. They continue to stand strong and make sacrifices daily to protect their home. Just this month at NATO, the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, and at the Munich Security Conference, we showed our Western alliance, and our support for Ukraine is as strong as ever. As the war enters its 5th year, our resolve will not falter. We will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. We will continue to put them in the strongest possible position for peace.
He's never going to enter an operational theatre. There's absolutely no need for him to be wearing combats. This is a propaganda exercise, and it confirms his status as a political agent in what is increasingly to be regarded as a media organisation. Now, this does go hand in hand with the press release about further support for Ukraine, and same old thing, essentially money. But the critical detail here, which of course we did point out at the time, as part of the additional support, and Mike's just referred to the coalition of the willing but not able, and we're following the landmark declaration in January of the UK's intent to deploy British troops to Ukraine once peace is secured. Of course, we had the spectacle of Boris Johnson on Monday talking to Laura Kuenssberg about his particular theories on where and when British troops should be deployed. But what we'll do now is just go a little bit further back to the Munich Security Conference and listen to what Keir Starmer said about other deployments.
I can announce today that the UK will deploy our carrier strike group to the North Atlantic and the High North this year, led by HMS Prince of Wales, operating alongside the US, Canada, and other NATO allies, in a powerful show of our commitment to Euro-Atlantic security.
So again, same old story, but slightly different area that we're referring to here. And of course, it's worth pointing out that the carrier strike group he refers to is the only one. It's not a carrier strike group, it is the carrier strike group, which gives a significant indication of exactly what the capability is with regard to the High North or the Arctic region, described as keeping the UK safe, but safe from what exactly? Never really articulated particularly. But of course, this is part of a more joined up process. Here we've got NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, convening exercise Arctic Edge, so they're all at it. Now, they're keen to point out, with all the rhetoric around Greenland earlier on this year and at the end of last year, they specify that all training activities in Greenland are conducted in full coordination with the Kingdom of Denmark. And they go on to say that they're improving readiness, demonstrating capabilities, enhancing interoperability among multinational, interagency, and joint force partners in the Arctic. So it all sounds very cooperative, but is that really the case? Is that what we should be taking away from it? And I think the question is worth asking. We look now at the Joint Expeditionary Force, which have been up and running for a number of years. But of course, most notable, if you can't see the image, is that it does not involve any North American nations. It is comprised of Europeans. Of course, they, as you would expect, do stand with Ukraine. Their promotional video shows lots of warfighting capabilities up in the Arctic region. And I think the question to be asked here is there actually going to be the potential for some degree of friction as we have more organizations, more cooperatives, more groups apparently entering the fray, or at least posing to do exactly that? As to how the JEF stands with regard to NATO, this diagram is supposed to clear it up for you. I would say it doesn't help enormously. If you can't see it, it's a rather confusing sort of crisscross diagram, or sort of to replicate a Venn diagram, suggesting that NATO JEF integration and mutual advantage is, of course, going to be where they coalesce, where they find a shared aim and a shared identity. Now, as for NATO itself, of course, they have also just launched a press piece about what they're describing as Arctic security. And this is under the banner of Arctic Sentry, something that's being stood up this month, February 2026. And it reflects the Allies' collective understanding that NATO must do even more as an alliance to ensure security in the Arctic and the high north, and to further strengthen its ability to operate in the region. Now, what exactly is one meant to take from that? They, of course, describe the backstory. They've been actively increasing their presence by establishing new structures throughout the high north, and that they're enhancing the alliance's situational awareness and the ability to operate in the region. Now, as I say, we're now looking at not just NATO, but also the Joint Expeditionary Force, the Coalition of the Willing, and the Board of Peace, to name but a few organizations that are all wanting, in effect, to take ownership of the delivery of peace through strength. This is one absolutely gigantic propaganda exercise. And just to illustrate that, I'll pick out a piece from the BBC yesterday in which they said that Russian soldiers tell the BBC that they saw fellow troops executed on commanders' orders, as though this would only ever happen in Russia and absolutely nowhere else. So we only have to go to the National Arboretum, the National Memorial Arboretum, to look at the Shot at Dawn Memorial, which commemorates 309 British and Commonwealth soldiers who were shot for desertion, cowardice, striking a senior officer, and so forth during the First World War. So these things do happen in places outside of Russia, if indeed they do happen in Russia. But of course, the propaganda is the central thrust to this. Mike, I'd be interested in your comment on where you see this going in particular, sort of alongside the push for deployment of troops into Ukraine.
Well, I'm fascinated. I mean, I knew anyway, but just as you express it in the way that you have, the Joint Expeditionary Force, of course, is UK and Europe working together. This is the embryonic European Defence Union, if you like. The United States has no part to play in it. And of course, this fits in with the whole narrative from the US, from the Trump administration, going back to the pre-election days, where they were presenting this idea that UK and Europe needs to be looking after Russia while they're busy looking in other directions. Obviously, they're now looking at Iran. They're still looking at Latin America and so on. So they're busy, and they want Europe to continue with this effort against Russia. But you know, if they're serious about opposing Russia militarily, they've got to either continue with the proxy war in Ukraine, or they have to ramp it up, because they don't actually have the men or material to actually prosecute a proper kinetic war. So in the meantime, we just have to suck up the propaganda and the hybrid attack on us as much as on anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly it. You know, all this rhetoric, particularly where the United Kingdom is concerned, is absolutely not reinforced by any suggestion that we do actually have the capability to be able to meet what's being described as a 30% increase in threats from Russian naval vessels in UK waters and all that kind of thing. And of course, they don't miss any opportunity to talk about the equipment that's being used from both Russia and China. So this is a sort of catch-all propaganda net.
Indeed. Okay, we need to move on. So let's say that we do need your ongoing support. So if you possibly can support us, have a look at the front page of the website. There's a button there to press, which will give you the information that you need. Thank you very much to everybody that is continuing to support us. It's absolutely appreciated. If you can't support us financially, then please do share anything that we publish on the UK Column website, because that helps us defeat the censorship that we're going to be talking about again a little bit later in the programme. Now, if you didn't see the video that went out in the 1 o'clock slot yesterday from Rotherham to Epstein, please do watch it. Now, this was a presentation was given at a UK Column event in Telford in 2015. It's just as relevant now as it was then. Nothing has changed. And what we aim to do in this presentation was to put all the various grooming gangs stories in the context of the overall child abuse picture in this country, because Epstein is only part of it. Grooming gangs are only part of it. This is something which is systemic and systematic in the UK, and hopefully that video will help people understand that a little bit better. Now, tonight, Jerm is talking about revising established history. This is going to be quite a controversial conversation. Do join us for that at 7 p.m. And at 9 p.m, Carl is taking a look at Starmer's recent visit to China. So join him at 9 for that. Tomorrow at 1 p.m, there's an interview with three ladies on the question of keeping children safe and what's being taught in libraries, or via libraries anyway. That's Kathy Mudge and two colleagues. Join Diane for that interview at 1 p.m. tomorrow. And there is an article on the UK Column website that goes alongside that, entitled Queer Fest at Exeter Library, Devon County Council's Child Safety Test. So quite a lot of content for you to have a look at there. Please do, and please particularly share it if you possibly can. That would be fantastic. Now, let's move on to the issue of digital identity. Because UK immigration enforcement is planning a third trial of live facial recognition at Holyhead Port in North Wales. This is a ferry port. This follows the two previous trials that Charles reported on last year. And in those previous trials, the Home Office claims that those resulted in 7,500 faces scanned with no incorrect alerts and one arrest made. There you go. Anyway, travellers arriving in the UK from Ireland are going to be scanned and compared against a database of offenders and people of interest, and that's beginning this week. Now, this is apparently because the UK intelligence services are reporting that individuals are using the Common Travel Area. This is the vastly pre-European Union agreement between Britain and Ireland about travelling between those two countries. So they're using the Common Travel Area to come into Britain without the normal checks, because, as I've reported on this programme many times, if you're travelling from Britain to Ireland, you're required to show your passport at Dublin Port. But if you are travelling from Ireland to Britain, or from Belfast, from Dublin, or from Belfast to Cairnryan, for example, or Belfast to Liverpool, there are no passport controls in those ports. So coming into the UK, there are currently no passport controls, but they're going to use facial recognition instead. So Gov.uk then has released a report on the legal mandate for live facial recognition at ports. And they're saying that the use of live facial recognition technology can enhance the Home Office's intelligence capability by comparing disembarking passengers against a watch list of individuals subject to extant or deportation orders, or people who are wanted on warrant in relation to an immigration-related criminal offence. So it's clear now that this is going to be rolled out nationally. The question is, has the Starmer regime done enough to radicalise people over the immigration issue, that this panopticon that they're trying to build is going to be welcomed by everyone? We'll see. Undoubtedly, we'll be talking about that in Extra as well. Now, the question is, how is this going to be regulated? Well, late last year, Starmer announced a consultation on the legal framework for live facial recognition use, and that consultation closed on the 12th of this month. And Professor William Webster, who's the Biometrics and Surveillance Camera Commissioner, has published a response. And he said that the new framework should be principles-based rather than technology-led. It should focus on purpose, proportionality, necessity, and harm rather than specific technologies. And that's all going to make sure that it's future-proof. And he said that its scope could extend beyond law enforcement agencies, to include all public and private organisations conducting surveillance for law enforcement or for public safety purposes. And my question then would be, does that include the likes of Palantir? Because that's not clear at this point. He said that the framework should have a codified restrictive approach, making specified activities an offence unless strict criteria are met, mirroring the Investigatory Powers Act 2016, because that is a spectacular piece of legislation, isn't it? And then he said that high-risk deployments should require pre-authorization by an independent regulator. And he described a new statutory independent regulatory body, which could be created merging the existing forensic science regulator and biometrics and surveillance camera commissioner roles. So in other words, he's touting for a job And he said that this body should have robust powers of audit, inspection and compliance enforcement, that it should report directly to Parliament and should cooperate as a single point of contact for industry and the public. So in other words, like the MHRA, the role would be that of an enabler and lobby organisation rather than a regulator in the strict sense. And then finally, he said that meaningful public engagement and a foresight function to anticipate emerging technologies must be embedded in the regulator from the outset. Well, we'll see. But the question is, where will all the data go? And the answer is into a database, of course. But will it be safe there? Because absolutely not. Yet another potential data breach has taken place, this time for 1 billion, yes, 1 billion digital ID records. And now these are believed to have contained highly sensitive personal information from at least 26 countries and totaling about a terabyte of data. The UK doesn't seem to have been affected by it. The United States, South America, most of the EU, China and Australia were. The data is believed to have been on a database run by ID Merit, whose little video clip you saw on screen there. And now this is a global identity verification company, and no one knows how long the database was accessible to just about anyone that wanted to come and have a look at it. It was supposedly secured after the company was informed of the issue by security researchers, and those researchers noted that the company has not issued any kind of detailed public statement or confirmed specifics of the incident. And in fact, the company itself appears to be claiming that this is all fake news and nothing to see there. Of course, it is not. But then finally, just very quickly, the Office for Digital Identities and Attributes has published the results of a survey of digital ID providers. And basically, the upshot of this is that they are very, very keen to see international interoperability, and Britain leading the way on international interoperability on this, because that will put them in a very good position as far as the digital ID market goes. So Britain to be driving this. Charles, let's head back to you then, and the question of ethics in war. And really, this is about AI, I suppose.
It is, and ethics is very closely related to what you've just been talking about in many ways, which I'll sort of come to. But I'll start with what Donald Trump was saying during parts of his State of the Union address, and in particular trying to boast about and sort of garner support for military or warlike activities. And he's there. This has all been sort of retweeted by the rapid response element of the Department of War. They began by reiterating the point that they've got the warrior dividend, essentially a tax-free payment to those serving in the armed forces of $1,776. And then we've got at the bottom of that in small text, which I've highlighted, peace through strength. Of course, the message to be spat out at every possible opportunity to reinforce what we're all supposed to believe. We've then got the Midnight Hammer, the operation in Iran, as choreographed by Tom Cruise in the Top Gun Maverick film. And then we have the Medal of Honor going to Eric Solver for Operation Absolute Resolve. By some strange quirk, E. Solver is, of course, an anagram of resolve. So quite what that pertains to, I wouldn't know. But the thing that unites all of these is really the question of necessity. And of course, Trump is there talking about all of them, but without making it at all clear that any of these military operations were in any way necessary. And that takes us to a former employee of Anthropic, and he's Mrinank Sharma, the head of a team into safeguarding research, and he's just left. He's put a letter of resignation, where else, on X. In it, he says that he continuously finds himself reckoning with our situation, meaning that of Anthropic in the AI world. The world is in peril, and not just from AI or bioweapons, but from a whole series of interconnected crises unfolding in this very moment. We appear to be approaching a threshold where our wisdom must grow in equal measure to our capacity to affect the world, lest we face the consequences. Now, he then goes into some poetry and whatnot. So it seems rather oblique, but what he's actually referring to is what Anthropic has been tasked to do by the Department for War. And it turns out he's not the only one at Anthropic that may be developing a conscience. And we have here from the Hill, the Pentagon threatens to cancel Anthropic contract by Friday if the company doesn't lift safeguards. So just to get a flavour of what this is about, from the Hill. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth met with Anthropic CEO on Tuesday at the Pentagon amid a dispute over the AI firm's usage policy, which bars its model Claude from being used for mass surveillance or to develop weapons that can be used without human oversight. Now, this has become something I think that hasn't had nearly enough scrutiny at all over the years. So it's a very interesting marker in the sand that Anthropic has created here, or potentially will create. Depends whether they're going to stand their ground or not. So I won't go into any further detail about that, because obviously we don't know exactly what is going to happen. But what we should do is then look at this side of the Atlantic and to DCIT, which of course has Anthropic as a partner in what's being described as the incorporation of top British AI expertise to help spark the renewal of public services and bolster national security. So what sort of consequence is this going to precipitate with the relationship with Anthropic, here described as specialists developing cutting-edge AI solutions which will run offline to support national security and defense teams to make vital decisions while safeguarding sensitive data. Okay, well, if we just think back to what Mike's literally just been talking about, how can they possibly say that can be safeguarded in the first place? But this should be set alongside the stark contrast with Clearview AI's position, which I reported on back in 2023, on their line on the war in Ukraine, which is essentially to say that they were going to pick a side and they were going to utilize their technology, or at least offer it up for targeting purposes. Here seen different ways our technology could be used to help. And then they had a bit up on their website citing a Time magazine article about Ukraine's secret weapon, basically as though their live facial recognition technology was used in order to bring about the death of particular individuals. There won't be a reference to this in the show notes because they've subsequently removed it from their website. So those are images that I'd captured at the time. And just to close off, I just want to finish with a look at the review from the Ministry of Defence into the regulatory system governing uncrewed and autonomous systems in defence. Of course, I reported on the Red Dragon AeroVironment technology suicide drone that the Americans have basically produced and are going to use. And just to make the point that the Ministry of Defence here behaving very much like the MHRA, which is to act as an enabler and be concerned much more with the speed and the provision of service as to whether it's actually right or not. So one of the questions asked in the consultation is this fit to enable you to achieve the aims of your organisation? And then several other questions in between. And they then ask what can be done to enable the government to make the investment in autonomy to be realised faster. And frankly, this is all that they seem to care about. Ethics absolutely cast to the wind. So we return to the situation with Anthropic in the States and see what this does actually tease out of the woodwork and what the result of that particular situation will be.
Indeed, and we'll see what direction OpenAI goes as well, and see, because all the big AI companies are going to have to make this decision at some point. Vanessa, let's come back to you then and move back to the Middle East and the question of what Israel is doing.
Yeah, interesting, the question of conscience very quickly, and we should discuss that in extra, that there is a potential that the crew of the USS Gerald Ford are actually pushing back against their 300 days at sea and the potential of being targeted in a war against Iran. And they are potentially sabotaging the mission. So that's something we should definitely discuss in extra, because perhaps conscience is now coming to the fore among many of the military and some of these surveillance and AI organizations. Just an aside. So, of course, Israel, in addition to building up the proxy forces as part of the hybrid war against Iran, of course, it's threatening the Lebanese resistance. It's basically passed messages through various diplomats and politicians in Lebanon saying if Hezbollah should respond in any way, if the US and Israel enter a war with Iran, it would hit multiple targets, more than 1,200 targets in Lebanon, including the only civilian airport, which of course would be a humanitarian war crime. with multiple civilian flights coming in and departing on a daily basis. And then basically in the last 3 days, they've carried out an extensive attack on the eastern border in Lebanon, in the Bekaa area. If we can just have the slide up on screen. The death toll from the Israeli strike comes to now 10 people killed, including the leadership of Hezbollah, over 30 injured, the majority of civilians. At the same time, they've also carried out drone strikes against Lebanese army positions in the south, because the Lebanese army dared to actually establish a new border post in southern Lebanese territory without coordination with Israel. So heaven forbid they do that and act as if Lebanon is a sovereign country. So Israel carried out strikes. And finally, I want to actually bring everyone's attention to this story, which I think broke the heart of everyone here in Lebanon. You either die with your family around you or you die alone. This is a gentleman who is, I think, a 62-year-old father and grandfather. He went with his wife to visit his family in southern Lebanon. He received a call from an Israeli number saying, you have a choice. You can die with your entire family and his wife's family, or you can leave them and die alone. He made the choice. He left his family, he got into his car, and he was assassinated. So just for people to understand the sheer psychopathy that is being generated against the Lebanese people on an almost daily basis.
Thanks, Vanessa, for that report. Now, plenty to talk about in extra today, it seems. Now, let's come back to the UK and online safety. On Monday this week, then Ofcom announced that they have fined the porn company 8579 LLC £1.35 million for not having age verification checks in place, plus £50,000 for not responding to an information request from Ofcom. Now, under the Online Safety Act, any site that allows pornographic material must use what they describe as, we've described it many times, highly effective age assurance to prevent children from getting access to that type of content. Now, within days of that coming into force in July 2025, Ofcom launched investigations into lots of adult sites, including 8579 LLC and so on. Now, the thing is that they have had this fine put in place for failing to comply with the age verification requirements. They go on to say that, of course, that fine increases by £1,000 per day if this company doesn't pay up. But the question I wanted answered was, how would they actually collect this money, bearing in mind that 8579 LLC is not a UK company? So I asked them, and this was their response. If a provider fails to pay a fine, Ofcom is entitled to seek recovery of those penalties where appropriate. If a provider fails to comply with a requirement to implement age assurance, we can also seek a court order for business disruption measures, such as requiring payment providers or advertisers to withdraw their services from a platform, or requiring internet service providers to block a site in the UK. So, in other words, it's all smoke and mirrors. They are grabbing headlines by issuing these fines. Then they're not in a position to actually do anything. So when they post a press release describing how they've actually received any money from such a fine, then maybe we can take them seriously. In the meantime, Discord has apologized for its age assurance mess up when it announced that Palantir-funded identity provider Persona might collect data from users as part of an experiment related to Discord's age assurance rollout. And they've also said that they're delaying the global age verification rollout. Now, they said the way this landed, many of you walked away thinking we are requiring face scans and ID uploads from everyone just to use Discord. That's not what's happening. But the fact that so many people believe it is tells us we failed at our most basic job, clearly explaining what we're doing and why. That's on us. This is typical marketing nonsense. But they also attempted to reassure everyone about the fairly big data breach that they suffered at the end of last year, which we reported at the time. To be clear, it went on to say, we do not use the vendor who caused the data breach last year for age assurance. In fact, we no longer work with them at all, and we've taken lessons from that incident seriously. Really? Well, back in the UK then, the Information Commissioner has fined Reddit £14.47 million after deciding that Reddit had failed to use children's personal information lawfully. They cited serious failures in age assurance under UK data protection law, and they said that that Reddit failed to comply with any robust age assurance mechanism and therefore did not have a lawful basis for processing the personal information of children under the age of 13. And they said that it failed to carry out a data protection impact assessment to assess and mitigate risks to children before January 2025. But if anyone thinks, well, no problem, I'll just move to Russia to avoid all this nonsense. Well, no, actually, because as Russian news website WWW1 reports, customers have been using the Max Messenger app to verify their age when purchasing goods from shops that need to be age verified of being over 18. And that's now happened more than 1 million times. So that number continues to grow daily, they report. And they report the State Secretary Deputy Minister of Industry saying explaining this to reporters. Now, this works at 18 of Russia's largest retailers and more than 70,000 stores. So the same kind of problem of age assurance, digital ID, online safety, these types of issues, as active in those countries as they are in ours. So, right, Charles, let's move on then back to the issue of politics in the UK.
We will, and we'll return to the significant amount of attention that's been garnered by Rupert Lowe's announcement that Restore Britain will become a sort of a formal entity. And I think the question to be asked is, what sort of Britain are they aiming to restore? Because Rupert Lowe, certainly at a closer inspection, is not quite who he purports to be. And we've got the announcement now that Orla Minihan is going to be the spokesman or spokesperson for violence against women and girls. But specifically, Orla founded the Pink Ladies, a national network dedicated to protecting women from migrant crime. So actually, it's not just violence against women and girls. There's definitely an angle here, but we'll just take a quick look before we come to that at who she is. This is her on LinkedIn. And interesting to note that during the height of the COVID tyranny, she was working as a transformation program director for the National Health Service. And she went on, or has gone on, to become immersed in transformation with digital business services for HSBC, and now works for Deloitte as a program manager. So she is absolutely a corporate waller, but that is not very much the image that Restore Britain is trying to put forward. We'll just look at the Pink Ladies on Twitter saying very specifically that they want to protect British women. I think there's a fairly strong undercurrent there in terms of messaging. And this has been identified by the Byline Times, which have written an article saying or describing the Pink Ladies as laundering anti-migrant views into the mainstream, which I'll go on and sort of qualify to a certain extent, but a lot of that revolves around the misuse of statistics that have been generated by a so-called think tank for migration, or at least to create the impression that migration is responsible for particular issues, especially concerning violence towards women and girls. Now, to get a better sense of the opportunism and indeed fact that this lady in particular is happy to hop from supporter to supporter. Here she is with Jacob Rees-Mogg, apparently, who was flavour of the week at that point. Lo and behold, she is from Epping, posting on Twitter a photograph of the so-called Lion of Epping, who received much publicity during the protests last summer. Another tweet with the caption, "We are all Epping." No accident. This is if you can't see it, a photograph of the Union flag flying above the flag of Israel on the same stick, and apparently that is for her the symbol of Epping. Just in case that wasn't clear enough, she's then tweeted that Britain does not stand with Gaza. British people do not support terrorists. Apparently, the two are synonymous. True British patriots stand for peace, freedom, justice, and respect. That's apparently what we fought 2 world wars to protect. So that's the sort of person that she seems to be. And then we mustn't forget that she did stand as a candidate for Reform UK. So far, Restore, in much the same way that Reform have with all their Tory party crossers of the line, forgive me, I can't remember the word, but defectors, that's the one. Restore looking similar, and at the individual and indeed collective level, they're now transmitting a message that is suggestive of jingoistic opportunism without any substance by means of a clear or credible message. And I think this is just something that people need to be aware of, is exactly who are these people and what is it they are using in order to garner support. And of course, migration is absolutely at the heart of this. And so I just finish by reminding you that that absolutely has been manipulated both ways. And of course, we have the Labour Together Brit card proposal, effectively from the other end of the apparent spectrum last year.
Thank you, Charles. Okay, let's move on then to, we can't let the programme end without mentioning Peter Mandelson, of course, because as everyone knows, on Monday, the Met Police arrested Mandelson on suspicion of misconduct in public office. So Mandelson joins Andrew in being suspected of improperly passing UK government information to Epstein. Following it's all in the emails and the various other document releases. Mandelson is supposed to have forwarded Epstein a memo written to Gordon Brown, the Prime Minister at the time, that was appearing to confirm the timing of an EU bailout before it was publicly announced. Mandelson's lawyers argued that his arrest was prompted by a baseless suggestion that he was about to flee the country. And that, in fact, he had agreed, the lawyer said that he had agreed to attend a voluntary interview next month. He was released on bail, and we'll see what happens on that. In the meantime, then, the Telegraph has reported the expanding fallout from the Epstein situation, which is now gathering around the Rothschild empire. In this case, it's Ariane de Rothschild, CEO of the family-owned Edmond de Rothschild Swiss private bank. So the Telegraph here is saying that the Epstein releases are showing that she corresponded dozens of times with Epstein and arranged multiple meetings over around 5 years, right up until his death. And this has caused significant reputational damage because the disclosures contradicted, they say, an earlier characterization by the bank that she'd met Epstein only as part of her normal professional duties. Now, she's still claiming that her relationship came about purely because of his Epstein's standing as a significant global businessman. But the files showed that she negotiated a $25 million consulting contract with Epstein in 2015, and her name appears over 4,400 times in the document release so far. I'm sure if as the analysis of that goes on, there's every opportunity for that number to rise. But well, it's been a bit embarrassing, and they've had to write to all their customers and beg for their customers to stick around. Some of their customers aren't very happy about the bad publicity that this brings. Charles, let's end then with subsidies to farmers.
Indeed, as Julian Rose has always said, subsidy creates slaves, and that is absolutely, I would say, the correct way to look at it. However, when Emma Reynolds, the Environment Secretary, spoke to the NFU yesterday, she was very much trying to sell the line that the government were supporting farmers, that food security and national security are inextricably linked, that there shouldn't be a choice between producing food or recovering or saving nature. She also perpetuated the absolute lie that the government has increased the threshold for agricultural property relief from £1 million to £2.5 million, because of course it was zero. Nothing had actually changed. So that is absolutely a propaganda offering. She produced the curious statistic that 65% food security is where we are in the United Kingdom. How she accounts for that enormous jump was not made quite clear. But just as an illustration of the sincerity of what she was saying insofar as her position that the government are going to support farmers, she said that the environmental land management offerings were going to be produced later that day, yesterday, which indeed they were. And I've just pulled out of that funding for farmers, growers and land managers. And in particular, the line item, Farming Equipment and Technology Fund, which has thrown at it a grand total of £50 million available to farmers, growers, foresters and their contractors. Now, there are over 209,000 holdings in England alone. So the question that might be asked is, £50 million, is that it? And just as a frame of reference, I'd remind you that the Garden Bridge project in London, which achieved absolutely nothing. Somebody drew some stuff and then made a model, and that cost 53 million quid. And yet farmers are being apparently sweetened with a £50 million offering to go to all of them. So that's the state that the state of the disdain with which government treats the farmers that it says that it respects and wants to support. Now, just to wind up, vaguely related to agricultural or rural matters, I'm going to share a short video which I think encapsulates very many of the things that we see going on in the background in the United Kingdom in 2026. This is how you deal with a flood, apparently. Thankfully, she survived to tell the tale, so I hope that brings a smile.
Yeah, well, Charles, I'm not sure which was worse, the fact that she didn't want to get out of her car, or the fact that the fire brigade felt she needed some kind of flotation aid. But anyway, we can talk about that in extra as well. Look, we got to leave it there for today. I want to say thank you very much to Vanessa and Charles for joining me today, and for everybody that's been watching. Stick around for the News Extra in a couple of minutes if you're UK column members. Stay on the live stream. Otherwise, consider joining us, and then you can join us for News Extra each time we do a news programme. Don't forget Carl and Jerm tonight, and also the interview with Dan tomorrow. And we'll be back 1 p.m. as usual for more news on Friday. See you then. Bye-bye.